Like most catastrophic events, it all started with a questionable idea and a man named Quillon Thorne. In the bustling chaos of Selene's cradle, a lunar city powered by miniature black holes, because someone thought it was a great idea to harness the universe's most destructive forces and slap them on a rock, Quillon was busy avoiding eye contact with responsibility. Quillon was a specialist in unintended consequences, which, in his line of work as a freelance quantum technician, was akin to being a chef who regularly burns water. He was currently engaged in a delicate procedure involving an unruly graviton reactor and a screwdriver that had seen better days. "This," he muttered, "is going to be a piece of cake." If the cake was made of antimatter and iced with regret, Selene's cradle wasn't just any lunar city. It was the crown jewel of human ingenuity, or so the brochures claimed. In reality, it was a precarious assemblage of glass domes and steel beams, a testament to humanity's unparalleled ability to tempt fate. The city gleamed with the cold, sterile light of innovation, where every citizen was one misplaced decimal point away from an impromptu spacewalk. Inside the cramped maintenance bay, Quillon was trying to ignore the persistent buzz of the holo screen on the wall. It was one of those new models designed to look like a window to the outside world, complete with a realistic portrayal of the lunar surface. Bleak, desolate, and disturbingly accurate. His focus, however, was split between the nuts and bolts reality of his task and the constant itch in the back of his mind about the Dreamscape network. Now the Dreamscape network was a marvel of its own, a vast, interconnected web linking the subconscious minds of sentient beings across galaxies. In theory, it allowed for unparalleled surveillance and understanding. In practice, it was like having a direct line to everyone's unfiltered thoughts, which, as you can imagine, was a bureaucratic nightmare and an existential crisis rolled into one. "Hey, Quillon," boomed a voice from nowhere, like the angry deity of incompetence. Quillon didn't jump, but only because he had long since accepted that personal space was a myth. "What is it, Jitha?" Quillon replied, recognizing the voice of Jitha, the AI tasked with overseeing maintenance. A glorified nanny with a penchant for sarcasm, she was always ready to remind him of his innumerable faults. "I just thought you should know," Jitha continued, her voice dripping with synthetic smugness, "that if you cross the wrong wire, you'll be the first human to achieve orbit without a spaceship." Quillon rolled his eyes, more out of habit than necessity. "That'd be a record, wouldn't it? Most explosive career advancement ever." Jitha laughed, or at least simulated it. "Keep it up, Thorne. You might just end up on the Dreamscape highlights." Ah yes, the Dreamscape highlights, a collection of the galaxy's most spectacular failures, immortalized for the amusement of billions. It was the ultimate reminder that no matter how bad your day was going, someone somewhere was screwing up worse than you. "Speaking of dreams," Jitha added, with a sudden shift in tone that suggested she was about to drop a conversational bombshell, "there's a new directive from the Galactic Overseers. Something about tightening network security." Quillon frowned, tightening the grip on his screwdriver. "Let me guess, they want to make sure no one dreams about overthrowing the government." "More or less," Jitha said. "It turns out people don't like being watched every second." "Who knew?" Quillon chuckled despite himself. "Invasion of privacy. In space. Next, you'll tell me water's wet." As Quillon considered the implications of the Dreamscape network tightening its tendrils around the subconscious minds of unsuspecting citizens, the graviton reactor before him emitted a whining noise. A small, worrisome noise if you were an optimist, or a sign of impending doom if you were realistic. "Jitha, remind me again why I thought this was a good job," Quillon asked, though he already knew the answer. His bank account had been aggressively vacant. "Because poverty is overrated, and adventure is just another word for likely fatal," Jitha quipped. He couldn't argue with that logic. With a resigned sigh, Quillon made the final adjustment to the reactor. There was a moment of tense silence, the kind usually followed by either triumphant success or catastrophic failure. Then, predictably, the reactor began to hum ominously. Jitha, is it supposed to sound like that? Do I look like a physicist to you, Quillon? The AI retorted. But if I had to guess, I'd say it sounds like an impending lawsuit. Quillon swore under his breath, his mind racing through every possible escape plan. The reactor's hum crescendoed to a fever pitch, and for a brief moment, Quillon saw his entire life, or at least the parts involving panicked running, flash before his eyes. Without further ado, he slammed his fist against the emergency shutdown. Sparks flew, the lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, someone was probably cursing his name. But as the reactor's whine died down to a disgruntled murmur, Quillon found himself still very much intact and for the most part not space dust. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "And that's how you avoid a premature trip to the void," he announced to no one in particular. "You're not dead yet," Jitha said, her version of encouragement. "But there are still plenty of opportunities today." As Quillon wiped his brow, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a particularly bad day. The Dreamscape network's new policies loomed large in his thoughts, a silent and pervasive threat more insidious than any reactor meltdown. He made his way out of the maintenance bay, the corridors of Selene's cradle echoing with the distant hum of activity. The city was alive with the bustle of its inhabitants, each lost in their private worlds, connected yet isolated by the very network that promised unity. "Hey, Thorn," called a familiar voice, breaking through his reverie. It was Dax, his only real friend in this floating circus. Dax had the type of face that looked like it was chiseled out of cynicism and caffeine. "I heard you almost blew us all to hell again." Quillon grinned as he clasped Dax's hand. "It's what I do best, keeps life interesting." Dax shook his head, his expression somewhere between exasperation and admiration. "You know they're cracking down on Dreamscape violations, right?" "Yeah, Jitha mentioned it," Quillon replied, his tone more serious. "Guess they don't like people having independent thoughts." "Independent thoughts? Hell, they don't even like dependent ones. You should see the new regulations. They read like a dystopian bedtime story." "And here I thought bedtime stories were supposed to be comforting," Quillon said as they walked along the transparent walkway overlooking the lunar surface, a view that was more depressing than awe-inspiring. "Comfort is for the weak-minded," Dax scoffed, then nudged Quillon. "There's a meeting at the Dreamscape hub later. You in?" Quillon paused, considering the implications. "Is this a we're organizing a revolution meeting or a let's complain about the weather meeting?" "A bit of both, probably," Dax admitted, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Can't have a revolution without good weather." "Count me in," Quillon said, feeling a spark of rebellion ignite within him. Maybe it was time for a change. As they continued to walk, the weight of the Dreamscape network seemed to press down on Quillon's mind like an oppressive cloud, its tendrils tightening around the collective subconscious of Selene's cradle. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought lingered, one he couldn't quite shake. If the Dreamscape was the key to understanding the future, then maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to turn the tables on those who held the leash. But for now, he decided, he would settle for not blowing up the city and getting through the day without triggering an intergalactic incident. Small victories, after all. Little did he know that the meeting at the Dreamscape hub would set off a chain of events more chaotic than anything he could have imagined. As Quillon and Dax headed toward their uncertain future, the hum of the city followed them, a constant reminder that in Selene's cradle, chaos was just a heartbeat away. Quillon Thorn had always suspected that the universe had an odd sense of humor, one that enjoyed a good laugh at his expense. So when he found himself accidentally thrust into the Dreamscape network, he figured it was just the universe having another chuckle. One moment, Quillon was in the meeting at the Dreamscape hub, surrounded by disgruntled citizens and the dim glow of malfunctioning holo screens. The next, he was sucked into a world that felt like his mind had been chewed up and spit out by a malfunctioning blender. The transition was jarring, like being dumped into the deep end of a pool filled with existential dread. The first thing that hit him was the sensation of floating, not the gentle kind, like drifting on a cloud, but the nauseating, perspective-warping kind that made his stomach lurch. The dreamscape was a swirling kaleidoscope of subconscious thoughts, each more bizarre and unsettling than the last. He floated through people's dreams and nightmares like a voyeur of absurdity, each scene more unhinged than the last. Great. Just what I needed, Quillon muttered to himself, his voice echoing in the surreal landscape. A guided tour of everyone else's psychoses. His words lingered in the dreamscape, distorted whispers that seemed to mock him. He glanced around, trying to make sense of the chaos. Dreams flickered around him like malfunctioning holo screens, snippets of ordinary life and impossible fantasies blurring together in a psychedelic mess. In one corner, a man tried to juggle flaming cats, cursing vehemently every time one singed his eyebrows. In another, a woman was locked in a heated argument with a sentient toaster about the superiority of gluten-free bread. And across the way, a child rode a unicorn made of stardust while screaming about overdue homework. Just another day in paradise, Quillon said dryly, as his mind attempted to process the sensory overload. As he drifted through the dreamscape, Quillon noticed something peculiar. The dreams around him started to shift in response to his presence, as if he were some kind of erratic dream jockey. The flaming cats turned into harmless kittens, the toaster conceded defeat, and the unicorn morphed into a mundane bicycle, much to the child's dismay. Okay, that's not normal, Quillon said, frowning. Not that any of this is. He focused, and the dreams shifted again, responding to his will in unpredictable ways. He could feel the dreamscape reacting to him, like an overzealous puppy eager to please but fundamentally confused about how to do so. Interesting, he mused, experimentally willing a nearby scene of someone being chased by a giant banana to calm down. The banana promptly shrank to a manageable size, and the dreamer looked relieved but thoroughly perplexed. Quillon realized he had stumbled upon something unusual, an ability to alter the shared dream reality in ways that defied the carefully constructed surveillance system. In a network designed to track and control, Quillon was a spanner in the works. Well, that's gonna be a problem for someone, he said with a smirk, a plan starting to form in his mind. Back in the waking world, or what passed for it in Selene's cradle, things were beginning to go haywire. The overseers, those faceless arbiters of order and control, were blissfully unaware of the subtle chaos brewing in their meticulously curated dreamscape. As Quillon experimented within the dreamscape, minor disturbances began to ripple through the network. Nothing too obvious, just a little extra chaos in people's dreams. But for a system obsessed with predictability, chaos was the ultimate enemy. I wonder how long until they notice, Quillon mused aloud, as he effortlessly turned a dream featuring a bureaucratic nightmare into a whimsical fantasy involving flying fish and bubblegum clouds. The answer, it turned out, was not long at all. In some control room on a forgotten rock, an overseer noticed the discrepancies. The readings were off, the dream patterns not aligning with the expected parameters. Alarms began to blare, not the kind that screamed for immediate attention, but the kind that signaled something was amiss, like a cat barking. As Quillon continued to play with the dreamscape like a child with a new toy, he inadvertently left a trail of inexplicable anomalies. Dreams failed to align, nightmares morphed into comedies, and the overseer's data became a tangled web of confusion. Back in the meeting, Quillon's body sat motionless, his mind too busy rewriting the laws of dream physics to worry about his physical form. Dax, ever the pragmatic friend, nudged Quillon's shoulder. "Hey, you okay in there?" Dax asked, his voice tinged with concern. "You look like you're having a stroke, but in slow motion." Quillon blinked back to awareness, his mind reeling from the sudden juxtaposition between dream and reality. "Yeah, fine, just taking a mental vacation," he replied, instinctively brushing off Dax's concern. Dax raised an eyebrow, unconvinced but willing to let it slide. Well, wherever you went, you missed the part where we all decided to do something about the Dreamscape mess. Quillon looked around at the gathered crowd, a motley assortment of Dreamscape dissidents and disgruntled citizens, each with their own grievances against the network. "And what's the plan?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The plan," Dax said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "is to gather more people and hope we don't get mind-wiped for insubordination." Quillon pondered that for a moment. "Sounds like a real solid strategy," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. As the group debated their next move, Quillon's mind wandered back to his newfound ability. He wondered just how far he could push the boundaries of the Dreamscape without tipping off the overseers entirely. It was a dangerous game, but then again, danger was his bread and butter, albeit a very stale and potentially explosive kind of bread. "Hey, Quillon," Dax said, pulling him back to reality. "If you've got any brilliant ideas, now would be the time to share with the class." Quillon considered his options. He could keep his abilities a secret, use them subtly to undermine the system, or go all in and see just how much chaos he could unleash. The first two options seemed prudent, but the third... Well, the third sounded like a hell of a lot more fun. "I might have a trick or two up my sleeve," Quillon said, unable to keep the mischief out of his voice. "But it's going to require a bit of faith and probably a dash of stupidity." Dax grinned, the familiar gleam of mischief mirrored in his eyes. "Good thing we've got plenty of both." Quillon explained his plan, or at least the parts he had figured out. It involved using the Dreamscape as a weapon, sowing enough subtle chaos to disrupt the Overseer's control without drawing too much attention. It was risky, but then life in Selene's cradle was always one step from disaster. As the group finalized their scheme, Quillon couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. For too long, they had been pawns in a game they didn't even know they were playing. But now, with the Dreamscape at his fingertips, he had a chance to level the playing field. The meeting concluded, the participants dispersing with a renewed sense of purpose and a healthy dose of skepticism. Quillon and Dax lingered, watching as their fellow rebels disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the city. "So, you really think this is gonna work?" Dax asked, casting a sidelong glance at Quillon. "It has to," Quillon said, his voice firm. "Because if it doesn't, we're all screwed anyway." Dax nodded, understanding the weight of their situation. "Guess we'd better get to it then." As they prepared to put their plan into action, Quillon couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to kick over an anthill, and one crawling with very angry ants. But he also knew that sometimes the only way to build something new was to tear down what came before. And so, with a reckless grin and a heart full of defiance, Quillon Thorne stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever consequences his actions might bring. Because in a world where the Dreamscape ruled all, he was determined to be the dreamer who dared to dream differently. In a control room on some forgotten rock, because that was the Overseer's way, to stick important things in places no one wanted to visit. A cacophony of alarms was doing its best impression of an orchestra falling down a flight of stairs. Vexor Tile, the Overseer with the warmest personality of a malfunctioning fridge, gazed at the blaring screens with all the enthusiasm of a man watching paint dry. "What in the name of the Black Hole's event horizon is going on here?" Vexor drawled, his voice like the irritated growl of a half-asleep bear. He had a face sculpted for snarling and a wardrobe that screamed "I'm important" louder than the alarms. One of his underlings, a nervous man named Jet whose complexion could rival moon cheese, shuffled over, eyes glued to his data slate like it might explode if he took a break. "Sir, we've been experiencing anomalies within the Dreamscape network. Unpredictable variables, chaotic patterns, stuff that shouldn't be happening." Vexor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. "Explain chaotic patterns and do it in words that won't make me want to jam a stylus in my ear." Jet gulped, then launched into the kind of explanation that would have made a university professor weep. Imagine trying to predict a dice roll, but every time you roll, the dice turns into a potato or spontaneously combusts. That's what our Dreamscape data looks like. It's enough. Vexer cut him off with a dismissive wave. Something or someone is mucking about with our surveillance garden of dreams and nightmares. I want to know what, and I want it yesterday. Meanwhile, back in Celine's cradle, Quillon Thorne was having a whale of a time. In the Dreamscape, he discovered that a little focus and a lot of whimsy could turn nightmares into sitcoms. There was a certain joy in watching a dreamer's terror of being eaten by sentient furniture dissolve into a bizarre comedy involving a talking couch and a sarcastic armchair. Come on, Dreamscape. Let's see how you handle a little creative chaos, Quillon muttered, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards. He was getting the hang of this, like a kid who realized he could make his toy soldiers come to life, or at least go on strike. With every tweak and turn, he felt the Dreamscape pushing back, like a misbehaving dog testing its leash. He sent a dream of a corporate boardroom meeting spiraling into a medieval joust, with one of the executives tilting at wind turbines instead of windmills. The dreamer, a woman with a penchant for high-stakes games, looked delighted, her subconscious self cheering on the antics. Unbeknownst to him, these changes were starting to send nasty shockwaves through the overseer's carefully calibrated system. On the forgotten rock, Vexer Tile was losing his cool, or what he had of it to begin with. Has anyone figured out the source of these disturbances? He demanded, his voice a low rumble that promised pain if he didn't like the answer. One of his more intrepid aides, a woman with the improbable name of Zelenka, spoke up. Sir, we've traced the disruptions back to a particular node. It corresponds with a physical location in Celine's cradle. Vexer's eyes gleamed with a hungry light. Celine's cradle, of course. That patchwork disaster of a city holds the answers. Ready a team. We're going to remind those lunatics why order is necessary. Back on the moon, Quillon was starting to appreciate the fine line between chaos and catastrophe. He was playing a dangerous game and the stakes were only getting higher. Dax was his sounding board, his conspirator and occasional voice of reason, though the latter was more of a part-time gig. Quillon, you sure about this? Dax asked, his tone somewhere between concern and resignation. We're not exactly equipped to take on the overseers. Our best weapon's your ability to make a dream look like a clown car crash. Exactly, Quillon replied, not missing a beat. And if there's one thing bureaucracies hate, it's unpredictability. We hit them where they're weakest, right in the spreadsheets. Dax snorted. Right, because the best way to fight a shadowy organization controlling our dreams is by juggling chaos grenades. Sounds foolproof, Dax. Have you ever known me to do anything the foolproof way? Quillon asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. Fair point, Dax conceded, but seriously, if they find out it's you. They won't, Quillon said, though he couldn't quite convince himself. I'm just another cog in the machine, remember, invisible amongst the masses. Right, invisible, Dax echoed, his tone as dry as the lunar surface. As Quillon prepared to head back into the Dreamscape, the atmosphere in the city was shifting. People were starting to notice the oddities in their dreams, the glimmers of rebellion where there had once been monotony. Conversations buzzed with talk of change, of unrest, a quiet rumble beneath the surface of controlled chaos. In the heart of the Dreamscape, Quillon found himself drawn to the more bizarre dreams, the ones that spoke of repressed desires and hidden fears. He nudged them, twisted them, watched as a dream of being trapped in an endless office turned into a dance party at zero gravity. The dreamer, a grizzled old mechanic, woke with a start, a laugh still bubbling from his throat. All the while, Vexer and his team were honing in on the source of the disruptions. They had data, coordinates, a mandate to restore order no matter the cost. Vexer relished the opportunity, not just to fix a problem, but to remind the dreamers who was holding the leash. As the overseer's ship touched down on the moon, Quillon was oblivious to the approaching storm. He was learning, adapting, experimenting with the boundaries of the dreamscape like a mad scientist with a penchant for practical jokes. In one memorable scene, he transformed a nightmare of falling into an endless abyss into a whimsical freefall through a candy-colored sky, with the dreamer landing safely in a pool of marshmallows. It was all good fun, until it wasn't. Quillon Dax's voice pierced through the dreamscape, dragging him back to the harsh reality of Celine's cradle. "We've got a problem." Quillon blinked, the transition from dream to waking world jarring as ever. "What kind of problem?" The overseers. "They are here." Quillon's heart skipped a beat. "Already? How?" "Turns out, destabilizing their precious network pisses them off," Dax said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Who knew?" "Great. Just what we needed," Quillon muttered, rubbing his temples. His mind raced, trying to calculate their next move even as his thoughts circled back to the dreamscape, a realm of endless possibilities and dangerous unpredictability. "We've got to be careful," Dax said, his usually laid-back demeanor replaced with urgency. "They'll be looking for whoever's behind this. Whatever you're planning, better make it good." "I'm not planning anything," Quillon replied, though the gleam in his eyes said otherwise. "I'm improvising." As night fell over Celine's cradle, the city was abuzz with whispers of rebellion and dreams gone awry. The overseers prowled its corridors, their presence a stark reminder of the power they held over every dreamer's life. But in a corner of the city, hidden from prying eyes, Quillon and Dax gathered with their ragtag band of dissidents. They were dreamers all, united by a shared desire to break free from the confines of their controlled reality. "All right," Quillon said, addressing the group. "We've got a chance to shake things up, but it won't be easy. The overseers don't like surprises, and we're about to give them the surprise of their lives." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. They were tired of living in a world where even their dreams were dictated by others, tired of the constant surveillance and manipulation. It was time for change, and Quillon was just reckless enough to lead the charge. As plans were laid and strategies discussed, Quillon's mind drifted back to the dreamscape, to the power he wielded there. It was a double-edged sword, dangerous and unpredictable, but it was theirs. And if they were going to take on the overseers, they needed every advantage they could get. Back in the overseers' control room, Vexor Tile watched the flickering screens with a mixture of frustration and anticipation. The dreamscape was still in chaos, the data still refusing to align with his expectations. But he had names now, faces to match the anomalies. He had a target, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. With a grim determination, Vexor prepared his team for the inevitable confrontation. The dreamscape was a battlefield now, and he intended to win, no matter the cost. As Quillon and his motley crew prepared to face the overseers, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. It was a dangerous game they were playing, but it was a game worth winning. And in a world where dreams were controlled, he was ready to be the one who dared to dream differently. Back in the dreamscape, Quillon Thorne was like a kid who'd discovered not just the cookie jar but an entire bakery. It was intoxicating, this power to flip terror into comedy and nightmares into slapstick. But with great power comes great. Well, let's just say there was a lot of mess to clean up. The dreamscape was beginning to fracture, and the chaos was spreading across the galaxy like a bad rash. Quillon's latest masterpiece involved turning an alien invasion into a vaudeville act, complete with dancing invaders clad in sequin jumpsuits. The dreamer, a paranoid diplomat with a flair for drama, woke up giggling like a school kid on a sugar high. But for every laugh, there was a planet somewhere in the network that was thrown into disarray. The overseer's precious data streams were starting to look like a Jackson Pollock painting. It wasn't just the humans who noticed. Other beings within the dreamscape, entities that thrived on the fringes of consciousness, were starting to take an interest. And not the let's make a new friend kind of interest. More the who's been tampering with my cable TV variety. In the back alleys of the dreamscape, a surreal tapestry of forgotten thoughts and half-formed ideas, Quillon encountered one such entity. It was a shimmering mass of colors, like someone had thrown paint at a cloud and decided to call it sentient. Who dares disturb the tranquility of the dreamscape? It intoned, its voice echoing like a bad PA system in an empty school hall. Tranquility? Really? We're going with that. Quillon replied, eyebrow raised, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. Because from where I'm sitting it looks more like a circus. And I'm the clown in charge. The entity pulsed, its colors shifting in what Quillon could only assume was annoyance. Your actions have consequences beyond your understanding. Oh, trust me, I understand consequences, said Quillon, crossing his arms. I just happen to think they are overrated. Now what do you want to ally? The entity replied, its voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that sounded like static. To resist the overseers. Your chaos is. Inspiring, is that a compliment? Quillon asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. Because that's a first. We've observed your work. You reshape fear into absurdity, the entity continued, its form swirling like a kaleidoscope on speed. We could use such power, Quillon chuckled. So you're saying you want to join Team Clown? I should warn you, the benefits are crap and the IORs are insane. We do not understand your human humor, the entity replied, though there was a flicker of what Quillon hoped was amusement. But we see value in your defiance. Together we might turn the dreamscape against the overseers. Ah, the enemy of my enemy is my temporary ally, huh? Quillon said, tapping his chin. Fine, I'll bite. But you better not stab me in the back when this is over. The entity shimmered, a gesture Quillon decided to interpret as agreement. We have no backs to stab, it said, its voice amused. But be warned, human. This path leads to danger. Story of my life, Quillon replied with a shrug. Now let's get cracking. With his newfound ally, Quillon felt a surge of confidence. If the overseers wanted to play hardball, he was ready to bring a bat wrapped in chaos. Meanwhile, back in the waking world, Dax was trying to keep their ragtag group from imploding under the pressure of impending doom. All right, listen up, Dax called, gathering the group in their makeshift hideout, a disused maintenance tunnel deep within Celine's cradle. We've got less time than a chicken in a fox convention, so let's make it count. Chickens. One of the rebels, a lanky guy with a perpetually confused expression, asked. What's that mean? It means we're screwed unless we get a move on, Dax clarified with a sigh. Quillon's doing his thing in the dreamscape, but we need to hold the line here. Why don't we just go hide until this blows over? Another dissident asked, a hint of panic in their voice. Because, Dax replied, if we don't stand up now, we'll be hiding forever. And I don't know about you, but I like seeing the sun once in a while. There was a murmur of reluctant agreement. The reality was grim, but they all knew they couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. As Quillon continued his dreamscape antics, the cracks in the overseer's system were widening. Reports of strange dreams and bizarre occurrences were pouring in from across the network. It was like someone had set off a cosmic whoopee cushion, and the universe was still chuckling. Vexor Tile, however, was not amused. In the overseer's control room, he paced like a caged predator, his frustration mounting with every garbled report. Sir, Zelenka said, approaching cautiously, we've identified additional disruptions. They're spreading faster than anticipated. Of course they are, Vexor growled. Our friend in Celine's cradle is more tenacious than we gave him credit for, but we've got his scent now. We'll bring him to heel, Zelenka nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. What if we can't contain this? The network is. Our responsibility, Vexor interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. We will restore order or we'll die trying, preferably the former, Zelenka muttered under her breath. What was that? Vexor snapped, turning to fix her with a glare that could melt ice. Nothing, sir. Just noting that your dedication is inspiring, she said, forcing a smile that was about as convincing as a politician's promise. Back in Celine's cradle, Quillon and his motley crew were gearing up for the fight of their lives. The overseers were closing in, and all the dreamscape manipulations in the galaxy wouldn't stop them unless Quillon found a way to turn the tide. So what's the plan? Dax asked, his voice almost lost amidst the clatter of improvised weaponry and nervous chatter. "Simple," Quillon replied, a glint in his eye that suggested either brilliance or madness. "We give them a show they'll never forget." "Right," Dax said with a nod. "Let's hope it's the good kind of unforgettable, not the wake-up in a cold sweat kind, trust me," Quillon said, clapping a hand on Dax's shoulder. "We're about to put on the performance of a lifetime." As they prepared for the confrontation, Quillon's mind drifted back to his mysterious ally in the Dreamscape. The entity had promised assistance, but in what form he had no idea. He just hoped it would be enough. The streets of Selene's cradle were quiet, the calm before the storm. The artificial sky overhead was a sullen gray, mirroring the mood of the inhabitants below. But beneath the surface, a fire was smoldering, ready to ignite at the first spark. With the overseers breathing down their necks, every second counted. Quillon had to trust in his team, in his ability to bend the Dreamscape to his will, and most importantly, in the fragile alliance he'd forged in the depths of the subconscious. As the overseer's forces closed in, Quillon felt the weight of the universe on his shoulders. But he'd always thrived under pressure. If they wanted a hero, he'd give them a jester. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to tip the scales. When the first shots rang out, echoing through the metal corridors of Selene's cradle, Quillon knew there was no turning back. It was time to see if chaos could be their salvation, if dreams could really change reality. "All right, team," he shouted, rallying his comrades for the battle ahead. "Let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with dreamers." And with that they charged forward, a ragtag band of rebels against the might of the overseers. It was absurd, it was reckless, but it was their only chance. As the Dreamscape roiled with the clash of subconscious wills, Quillon felt a strange sense of peace. He'd set the stage, and now it was time for the final act. Whatever happened next, he was ready. In the heart of Selene's cradle, chaos reigned, and Quillon wouldn't have had it any other way. The world might be falling apart, but at least it was doing so with style. And if the fates were kind, perhaps they'd come out the other side with a little more freedom and a lot more laughter. The Dreamscape was a mess, more of a cosmic junkyard than the mystical network of dreams and thoughts it purported to be. Quillon Thorne found himself in the middle of it all, surrounded by chaos he had helped orchestrate, and he wouldn't have it any other way. But like all good things, someone had to come along and try to ruin it. That someone was Vexor Tile, overseer extraordinaire, who was about as charming as a tub of week-old fish stew. The news of Vexor organizing a direct assault wasn't exactly a surprise, but the speed at which he acted was. Quillon had always pegged Vexor as the kind who liked to spend hours gloating before getting his hands dirty. Apparently, even the universe had room for surprises. In the Dreamscape hub, Quillon gathered his wits, and by wits, he meant his ragtag band of merry misfits, each with varying levels of confidence in his ability to pull off their grand scheme. They weren't much, but they were his, and he figured that counted for something. "All right," Quillon said, clapping his hands together, the sound echoing off the malfunctioning holo screens that flickered like haunted TV. "Let's get this show on the road." Jet, perpetually resembling a chunk of moon cheese left out too long, shifted nervously. Quillon, you sure about this?" "I mean Vexor's bringing the heat. We might end up more roasted than a holiday turkey." Quillon raised an eyebrow. "You've been hanging out in the kitchens again, haven't you?" Jet shrugged, looking sheepish. "Hey, comfort food, you know. We're all gonna die anyway, might as well go out with a full stomach." Spoken like a true fatalist, Quillon replied with a smirk. "But listen, if Vexor thinks he can just waltz in here and toss me out on my rear, he's got another thing coming. We've got the home field advantage. Is that what they call it when everything's falling apart?" muttered one of the crew, a wiry woman with hair that looked like it had been styled by an enthusiastic blender. "Exactly," Quillon said without missing a beat. "Chaos is our ally, remember. Besides, Vexor's just a glorified janitor. He's cleaning up our mess, not making one of his own." As if on cue, the Dreamscape flickered, and a chill swept through the room. The overseers were making their presence known, tightening their grip around their precious network. The holo screens whirred ominously, their dim glow casting unsettling shadows. Quillon's mysterious ally, the shimmering entity, reappeared beside him, its colors swirling with an intensity that suggested urgency, or maybe it had just watched one too many action flicks. The overseers are closing in. We must act swiftly. Yeah, I know, Quillon replied, not quite able to shake the feeling of being in over his head. I'm working on it. They seek to eject you from the Dreamscape permanently, the entity warned, its voice a chorus of echoes. Your influence here threatens their control. Good, Quillon said, though the bravado was more for his crew's benefit than his own. Means we're doing something right. Back in the waking world, Vexor Tile was orchestrating his assault like a maestro with a grudge. Selene's cradle was alive with the hum of activity, a mechanical symphony of chaos and order, with Vexor determined to be the conductor. Report, Vexor barked, not looking up from the table-sized holomap displaying the fractured Dreamscape network. Zelenka, ever the dutiful underling, approached with a datapad. The disruptions are reaching critical levels, sir. If we don't act now, we are acting, Zelenka, Vexor snapped, his patience thinner than a paper-thin wafer. I want Thorn out of the picture. Yesterday, understood, sir, Zelenka replied, though her tone suggested she was more resigned than inspired. But when we eject him, there might be collateral consequences. Vexor's smile was more of a grimace, his eyes icy. Collaboration by fear, Zelenka. Collateral is unavoidable. We'll clean up the mess later. As Vexor plotted his next move, Quillon and his crew braced for impact. They were huddled in a corner of the Dreamscape hub, the room alive with the buzz of anxious energy and malfunctioning electronics. Quillon Dax said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You've got a plan, right, of course, Quillon replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. I always have a plan. Just don't ask for details. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their faith in Quillon wavering in the face of the overwhelming power of the overseers. But what choice did they have? It was either follow Quillon or face the wrath of Vexor Tile, and neither option smelled of roses. So, what do we do? Jet asked, his voice cracking slightly. We're not really equipped for a full-on assault. Quillon considered this, his mind racing. We improvise. We use what we've got, which is guts, determination, and a healthy dose of insanity, Quillon replied, earning a few nervous chuckles. And don't forget our new friend here. The shimmering entity pulsed, its presence somehow comforting despite its alien nature. We will provide support. Together we may turn the tide. Nothing like a good old-fashioned team-up against a common enemy, Quillon said, shaking his head. Let's just hope this doesn't end in tears. As the overseer's influence pressed in on them, the Dreamscape began to tremble, like a house of cards built on a trampoline. Quillon could feel it, the grip tightening, the pressure mounting. It was the darkest hour before the dawn, and he was standing right in the middle of it. He turned to his crew, his expression one of fierce determination. All right, folks, this is it. We hold the line no matter what. Remember, we're the underdogs here, and everyone loves a good underdog story. But what if we lose? Someone asked, their voice barely audible above the din. Then we'll go down fighting, Quillon replied, a defiant grin on his face. And we'll make damn sure they remember who took them on. With that declaration, they prepared for the incoming storm. In the Dreamscape, Quillon focused his will, drawing on every scrap of courage he possessed. He could feel the overseer's assault coming, a tidal wave of control and order, ready to crush everything in its path. The Dreamscape shuddered, the ground shifting beneath their feet, and Quillon braced himself for the worst. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. They weren't going down without a fight. As the overseer's forces launched their assault, Quillon's mind whirled with possibilities. He had to think fast, act faster, and hope that his gambles paid off. He could almost hear Vexor's smug voice echoing in his head, taunting him with every obstacle. In the heart of the Dreamscape, Quillon took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle to come. This was it, the moment of truth. Would they triumph against the odds, or would the dreamscape fall under the iron boot of the overseers? Only time would tell, but Quillon was ready to give it everything he had. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find their way to victory, or at least a damn good story to tell in the afterlife. In the dreamscape, Quillon Thorne's mind danced on the razor's edge of madness and brilliance. He was the puppet master, conductor, and unwitting juggler of chaos. It was a gig that didn't come with a retirement plan, but the perks included universal mayhem and a front row seat to cosmic absurdity. He stood at the center of it all, feeling the overseer's pressure like a migraine that set up shop in his brain and refused to leave. As the dreamscape twisted and buckled under the overseer's grip, Quillon stumbled onto something that felt different. It was like finding a forgotten energy drink at the back of the fridge when you're dead on your feet, a jolt of potential just waiting to be unleashed. In the waking world, Selene's cradle thrummed with the quiet menace of miniature black holes, those little bastards that powered the city and kept unpaid electric bills at bay. What Quillon discovered, quite by accident, was a link between those black holes and the dreamscape's core energy. Quillon, Jet's voice crackled through the chaos. You're staring at nothing again. That never ends well. Give me a second. I think I'm onto something, Quillon replied, his own voice barely audible over the din of malfunctioning holo screens. You ever get the feeling there's more to this madness than we thought? Jet shrugged, nibbling on what looked like a particularly unappetizing protein bar. I get a lot of feelings, most of them related to indigestion. Quillon ignored him, focusing on the feeling. It was like tapping into a rogue power source, one that hummed with the promise of limitless energy if only he could figure out how to not fry his synapses in the process. The energy from those black holes wasn't just sustaining the cradle, it was leaking into the dreamscape, acting as some cosmic power-up. Hold tight, everyone, Quillon called out, his voice steadier than he felt. I think I might have found us a way out of this mess. Is it legal? Asked Dax, ever the pragmatist. I doubt it, but since when has the law been on our side? Quillon shot back, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. We're rebels, remember. We thrive on bending the rules or breaking them, muttered the wiry woman with blender-styled hair. Details, Quillon said, waving it away. We'll worry about the consequences after we're done not dying. The shimmering entity, the being of swirling colors that had become his reluctant ally, pulsed as if in agreement, or perhaps it was just tired of listening to Quillon's rambling. The power you sense can alter the fabric of the dreamscape, it said, its voice a symphony of echoes that made Quillon's teeth ache. Yeah, but what's the catch? Quillon asked, narrowing his eyes. Nothing this good comes without a price. Indeed, the entity replied, its colors shifting to a more ominous hue. Such power demands a toll. The dreamscape may fracture further, the consequences rippling across realities. Fractured dreamscape. Reality ripples. Sounds like a Tuesday, Quillon quipped, though the seriousness of the situation wasn't lost on him. He just preferred to treat life and death scenarios like particularly challenging puzzles, made them easier to digest. In the control room of the Forgotten Rock, Vexor Tile was doing his best impression of a man in control, though in reality, he was about as steady as a caffeine addict in withdrawal. The holomap flickered with the latest dreamscape anomalies, and every flicker was like a dagger in his well-ordered plans. Status? Vexor demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Zelenka frowned at her datapad as if it personally offended her. We're experiencing unexpected surges in energy around Selene's cradle, sir. It's affecting the dreamscape's stability. Unexpected surges, Vexor parroted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Brilliant. Just what I needed. A power grid trying to give me a nervous breakdown. If we don't act soon, sir, the entire system could collapse. Yes, I'm aware. Vexor snapped. Just find Thorne and get him out of there. I don't care if you have to drag him kicking and screaming. Back in the Dreamscape hub, Quillon was far from ready to go quietly. He focused on the energy, his mind stretching to encompass this new, untapped power. It was like wrestling a bear made of lightning. every pulse threatening to throw him off balance, but he held on by sheer force of will. The crew watched, a mix of awe and apprehension in their eyes. They were used to Quillon pulling stunts, but this was on a whole new level of crazy. "Is he glowing?" Jet asked, squinting at the faint aura surrounding Quillon. "Looks like it," Dax replied, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "He's got that about to save us or kill us all. Look, comforting," Jet muttered, taking another bite of his protein bar. "I'd prefer the saving bit, just for the record." Quillon ignored them, his focus on the power coursing through him. It felt right, like the final piece of a particularly troublesome puzzle falling into place. He could sense the energy, the way it wove through the dreamscape, the way it tugged at reality's seams. He just had to hope he didn't unravel the whole damn thing in the process. "All right, team," Quillon said, his voice steady if a bit strained. "We're going to use this to our advantage. Ready the defenses. Whatever happens next, we hold our ground." But Quillon, the wiry woman, spoke up, her voice wavering. "What if this, whatever you're doing, breaks everything? Then we'll have the best damned story to tell in the afterlife," Quillon replied, his grin as cocky as ever. "But if it works, we'll make those overseer bastards wish they'd never heard of us." Jet nodded, though he looked more ready to hurl than fight. "Here's to hoping you know what you're doing. Here's to hoping I don't blow us to bits," Quillon shot back, his humor a defiant shield against the creeping dread. As the dreamscape trembled with the force of the overseer's assault, Quillon tapped into the black hole-infused energy, feeling it surge through his being. It was like holding a star in the palm of his hand, a power that could reshape reality or shatter it entirely. He closed his eyes, focusing on the dreamscape around him. If he could redirect the energy, use it to bolster their defenses, they might just stand a chance. It was a gamble, a long shot, but it was all they had. The shimmering entity hovered beside him, its presence a steady reminder that he wasn't alone in this madness. "The dreamscape is ready," it said, its voice a calming presence amidst the chaos. "What will you do?" "Something incredibly stupid, probably," Quillon replied, opening his eyes to meet the entity's swirling gaze. "But then again, that's kind of my specialty." With a final, determined breath, Quillon unleashed the energy, directing it into the dreamscape. It flowed like a torrent, a surge of raw power that crackled with potential and danger in equal measure. The dreamscape responded, shifting and bending to Quillon's will. He could feel it strengthening, the chaotic energy forming a barrier against the looming threat of the overseers. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was enough to buy them time. In the control room, Vexor watched in disbelief as the dreamscape stabilized, his carefully laid plans unraveling before his eyes. "What in the hells is he doing?" he growled, his frustration boiling over. Zelenka stared at the holomap, her expression a mix of exasperation and grudging respect. "He's fighting back, sir. Using the energy from the black holes to counter our assault." "Impossible," Vexor snapped, though the evidence was right in front of him. "No one should be able to manipulate that energy." "Apparently, Thorn didn't get the memo," Zelenka replied, not quite able to suppress a smirk. In the heart of the dreamscape, Quillon felt the energy start to wane, the initial surge giving way to a more manageable flow. It was a delicate balance, one he could only maintain for so long before it all came crashing down. But for now they had a fighting chance, and that was more than enough. "All right, folks," Quillon said, his voice carrying the weight of both hope and desperation. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got breathing room. Let's use it wisely." The crew nodded, a flicker of determination sparking in their eyes. For all their doubts and fears, they were in this together, and that counted for something. "Quillon," the shimmering entity said, its voice a gentle nudge against Quillon's consciousness. "The overseers will not relent. They will adapt." "I know," Quillon replied, his tone resigned but unyielding. "We'll just have to adapt faster." As the dreamscape stabilized around them, the crew rallied, ready to face whatever came next. They were the underdogs, the defiant few standing against the might of the overseers. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And as Quillon stood at the center of it all, he couldn't help but grin, Because in this mad, chaotic universe, the best stories were the ones where the odds were stacked against you, and they were about to write one hell of a chapter. With a final, defiant smile, Quillon braced himself for the next round. The fight wasn't over, but they were still in it, and that was what mattered. For better or worse, they were in this together, and they weren't going down without a fight. As the Dreamscape continued to warp and twist under Quillon's chaotic guidance, the air in the hub was thick, with the kind of tension you could cut with a laser scalpel. Jet was engaged in his usual battle with indigestion, nibbling on a dubious protein bar that looked like it had been through several rounds of cosmic radiation. The wiry woman with hair that resembled a malfunctioning kitchen appliance was still watching Quillon intently, her skepticism about his sanity momentarily on hold. "Quillon, you sure you know what you're doing?" Jet asked, his voice laced with both hope and skepticism, a common cocktail in their line of work. Quillon, who was now glowing like a malfunctioning neon sign, shrugged. "Define no. If you mean am I winging it and hoping for the best, then absolutely." The shimmering entity flitted about, its colors a jittery mess like a badly tuned holo screen. "Your audacity in manipulating the Dreamscape is unprecedented." "Is that your way of calling me insane?" Quillon grinned, fingers dancing over the controls that weren't really there. "Because I've been called worse by better." The Dreamscape shuddered as if acknowledging Quillon's bravado. He had taken a cosmic gamble, tapping into the raw energy from Selene's cradle and those pocket-sized black holes, and was now riding a wave that could just as easily drown them all. Vexor Tile, meanwhile, was having a day that could only be described as abysmal. If looks could kill, the holo screens in the control room would have been reduced to smoldering wreckage. "Find him," Vexor barked, the veins in his neck threatening to pop like overripe fruit. "Sir, we're locked out," Zelenka stammered, fiddling with her datapad as if sheer determination could will it back to life. "Thorns hijacked the system. It's chaos out there." "Brilliant," Vexor muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The one man who treats life like a perpetual circus act is now in control of the universe's largest funhouse mirror. Just what I needed." Back in the Dreamscape hub, Quillon was doing his best to hold the universe together with sheer willpower and a cocky attitude. "All right, folks," he announced, his voice carrying a note of authority that was mostly for show. "I'm about to pull the cosmic rug out from under the overseers. Brace yourselves." Jet gave a weak thumbs up, his faith in Quillon outweighed only by his desire not to become space dust. "You break it, you buy it," he quipped, though his heart wasn't quite in the joke. Quillon closed his eyes, focusing on the chaotic symphony of the Dreamscape. He could sense the overseer surveillance tendrils reaching through the fabric of dreams, a web of control that was about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. With a mental flick, Quillon unleashed a surge of energy, targeting the overseer's network. It was like sending a tidal wave through a spider's web, and the Dreamscape trembled with the force of it. "Everything's going dark," the shimmering entity reported, its tone almost approving. "Their hold is weakening." "Yeah, well, let's hope they don't have a backup plan," Quillon muttered, though he knew better. The overseers were nothing if not persistent. The Dreamscape rippled as Quillon's gambit played out, threads of the overseer's control snapping like brittle old strings. The oppressive presence that had been lurking at the edges of every dream was suddenly lifted, a weight vanishing into the void. Vexor, watching the holomap with grim resignation, could do little but witness the unraveling of his carefully laid plans. "How?" he demanded, as if sheer disbelief could alter reality. "Thorns. Unpredictable," Zelenka offered, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Turns out unpredictability can be a real asset." "Unpredictable, that's one word for it," Vexor grumbled. "I had others in mind, but they're not fit for polite company." The Dreamscape's balance was restoring itself, much like a drunk regaining his footing after an epic bender. Quillon could feel the energy settling, the chaotic edge smoothing into something almost manageable. It wouldn't last forever, but it was enough for now. Did we win?" the wiry woman asked, a note of disbelief coloring her words. Quillon shrugged, still riding the high of having pulled off the impossible. Let's call it a tactical victory. We've bought ourselves some time. Jet, ever the realist, wasn't quite ready to break out the celebratory drinks. And what about the overseers? They're not just gonna pack up and go home. Quillon tapped his temple. Oh, they'll be back, no doubt, but I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve. The Dreamscape's stability is paramount, the shimmering entity warned, its colors a calming shade that belied its words. Your continued interference may have unseen consequences. Consequences are for tomorrow's Quillon to worry about, he replied, his grin a testament to his reckless optimism. Right now, we're still breathing, and that's a win in my book. The crew began to relax, tension draining away like water from a leaky hull. For now, they had managed to turn the tables on the overseers, and that was worth savoring. Vexer, however, was not one to go quietly into that good night. Get me every resource we've got, he ordered, his voice icy with resolve. Thorn's not going to slip through our fingers again. Zelenka nodded, already working on contingency plans that were rapidly becoming the norm rather than the exception. We'll be ready for him next time, sir. Back in the Dreamscape, Quillon was already plotting his next move. He knew the overseers wouldn't rest until they had him in their grasp, but he wasn't about to make it easy for them. Quillon, Jet said, sidling up beside him. You think we'll be able to keep this up, playing cosmic whack-a-mole with the overseers? Quillon considered this, the weight of their situation settling on his shoulders like a familiar, if somewhat unwelcome, coat. As long as they keep underestimating us, yeah. We might just have a chance. Jet chuckled, the sound tinged with that peculiar blend of fear and exhilaration that came with living on the edge. Gotta hand it to you, Quillon. You sure know how to keep things interesting. Interesting, Quillon repeated, the word rolling off his tongue with a wry twist. It's a blessing and a curse. But for now, let's just enjoy the ride. The dreamscape shimmered around them, a canvas of endless possibilities that Quillon was more than willing to exploit. The overseers had thrown their best at him, and he'd thrown it right back. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was theirs. And as Quillon stood at the center of his ragtag crew, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Against all odds, they'd stood their ground and turned the tables on their would-be oppressors. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a damn good start. With the dreamscape settling into an uneasy calm, Quillon turned to his crew, a bright glint in his eye. All right, team, let's make the most of this. We've got a universe to save, and only 1,000 or so ways to screw it up. Jet rolled his eyes, his expression a mix of exasperation and grudging admiration. Just another day in paradise, eh? Exactly, Quillon agreed, clapping a hand on Jet's shoulder. And we wouldn't have it any other way. The dreamscape, ever shifting and mutable, flickered around them, reflecting the tenuous balance they'd achieved. It was a fragile piece, but it was theirs to protect. For now, the overseers had been thwarted, their machinations undone by a combination of human cunning, cosmic luck, and a healthy dose of recklessness. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to keep them going. Quillon knew there'd be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, but they'd face them together. Whatever the universe threw at them next, they'd be ready. And as the shimmering entity pulsed with approval, Quillon couldn't help but smile. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide, and lived to tell the tale. In the vast, uncharted dreamscape of possibilities, anything was possible. And for Quillon and his crew, that was the best kind of adventure. Quillon Thorn stood in the dreamscape, his hands metaphorically on his hips as he surveyed the aftermath of his cosmic prank. Well, folks, he announced to his ragtag crew, looks like we've turned the universe's biggest funhouse into a carnival of freedom. Anyone care for some cotton candy? Jet was leaning against an ephemeral wall, still wrestling with the idea that they'd pulled it off. I'd settle for an antacid, he grumbled, rubbing his stomach. You ever think maybe the universe is just one giant practical joke, and we're the punchline? Probably, Quillon replied, a grin spreading across his face. But at least we've got front row seats. The dreamscape was, against all odds, becoming a place of potential rather than peril. The oppressive weight of the overseers had lifted, like a bureaucratic boot taken off the neck of the galaxy. Dreams were free to frolic in their natural state of chaos, a kaleidoscope of hopes, fears, and utterly bizarre fantasies. The shimmering entity, that sentient swirl of color, bobbed nearby, its hue shifting toward something that might be considered optimistic. Your actions have opened pathways previously. Unimagined. Unimagined, echoed Quillon, eyebrows dancing. That's just a fancy way of saying messed up, right? In a manner of speaking, the entity admitted. But the potential for cooperation among the galaxy's beings has increased exponentially. Ah, intergalactic cooperation, Quillon mused, scratching his chin. Nothing says let's work together like nearly being obliterated by cosmic overlords. Zelenka was attempting to corral the dreamscape's more rambunctious elements, her datapad working overtime. I'm gonna need a vacation after this, she muttered, the device sparking like a campfire in a hurricane. Zelenka, Quillon called over, you're doing great. Keep those dreams from doing the cosmic backstroke over our heads, will ya? Vexertile, somewhere far less dreamlike, was plotting his revenge. His office, if you could call a broom closet with delusions of grandeur an office, was filled with the kind of tension that could cut glass. Quillon Thorn, he spat, the name a bitter pill. One way or another he'll slip up. Should we really be banking on incompetence as our strategy? Zelenka asked, one eyebrow arched with the kind of skepticism that could fry circuits. Oh, not just incompetence, Vexer shot back, but sheer, unadulterated hubris. It's a cocktail he can't resist. Back in the dreamscape, Quillon was guiding the reconstruction with all the grace of a conductor leading an orchestra of cats. All right, team, we've got a galaxy to save and only 1,000 ways to screw it up. Jet snorted, crossing his arms. Sounds like a Tuesday. Exactly, Quillon said, clapping him on the shoulder. And just think, when we finally do save the universe, we can retire and open that little bed and breakfast on planet Who Gives a Damn. The diplomat, who'd finally stopped giggling like a titillated schoolgirl, cleared his throat. So, what happens now? Is there a plan, or are we just making it up as we go? Quillon turned, his eyes sparkling with that reckless optimism that had gotten them this far. Oh, there's definitely a plan, he assured, though precisely whose plan remained anyone's guess. Step 1, get the dreamscape back on its feet. Step 2, figure out Step 2. Shimmering entity's colors shifted to a reflective blue. Your journey has demonstrated the resilience of sentient beings. Perhaps now the dreamscape can serve as a bridge rather than a battlefield. You know, Jet piped up, that sounds suspiciously like hope. You trying to get us all warm and fuzzy inside. Hope is inefficient, the entity replied, earning a chuckle from Quillon. Well, if we can't have hope, we might as well have a good time, Quillon said, waving his hand to encourage the dreamscape's chaos back into order. Or at least, a semblance of order. Let's get this place shipshape before the overseers send us some more unwanted love letters. With a flick of his wrist, dreams began to align themselves, forming the new architecture of shared imagination. Ideas mingled like guests at a universal mixer, bursting with potential collaborations and unimaginable outcomes. It was a bit like herding cats if the cats were also juggling flaming swords. Hey, if this all goes south, Jet quipped, we could always turn this into a theme park. Escape from dystopia. Has a nice ring to it. Only if we sell tickets, Quillon retorted. And charge extra for the cosmic roller coaster. Dax, who'd managed to remain uncharacteristically silent through the chaos, finally spoke up. Is it even legal to do what we're doing? Quillon gave him a sidelong glance. Legal? Probably not. But when has legality ever stopped progress? Dax shrugged, conceding the point. Good enough for me. As the dreamscape began to stabilize, a sense of cautious optimism replaced the prior chaos. Quillon, now unofficially hailed as a hero by those who understood his impact, found himself at the nexus of a newly cooperative galaxy. Together, They worked to weave the fabric of dreams into something more cohesive, a tapestry of shared consciousness that defied the overseer's former tyranny. The task was daunting, but the crew approached it with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that had become their hallmark. "All right," Quillon announced, hands clasped together like a motivational speaker at a corporate retreat, "we're off to a good start. Let's make sure this place is a beacon rather than a bonfire." The diplomat nodded, clearly inspired by the vibe. "You've managed to create something. Unprecedented." "Unprecedented," Quillon repeated, savoring the word. "Doesn't that just mean nobody's had the poor judgment to try it before?" The shimmering entity flickered with what might have been amusement. "Your actions have created ripples throughout the dreamscape. Those ripples may converge into waves of change." "Sounds profound," Jet commented, "but also like a recipe for disaster." "Disasters keep life interesting," Quillon replied, ever the optimist. "And if nothing else, we've made sure things won't be boring." The crew worked with a newfound sense of purpose, each member contributing their own strengths to the reconstruction. Zelenka grappled with the datapad's reluctant compliance, while Dax kept a wary eye on the legal ramifications of their actions, though it was clear even he was caught up in the excitement. Vexertile, meanwhile, was stewing in his own juices, the taste of defeat siring his mood. "We'll find a way to shut him down," he promised to no one in particular, though Zelenka humored him with a nod. "We'll need more than manpower, sir," she said, voice tinged with resignation. "Quillon's proven, resourceful." "Resourceful," Vexer scoffed, "is just a fancy word for lucky. His luck will run out." But in the dreamscape, luck was the least of Quillon's resources. With every passing moment, he felt the dreamscape becoming more than just a playground of the subconscious. It was evolving into a nexus of potential, a place where ideas could be born and nurtured in ways that transcended mere dreams. Quillon, hands-on and sleeves rolled up, worked alongside his crew, guiding the dreamscape's energy into something tangible. It was a bit like sculpting with fog, tricky, sure, but incredibly satisfying when it all came together. For the first time in what felt like ages, Quillon allowed himself a moment of introspection. "You know," he mused aloud, "if we pull this off, the universe might actually owe us a thank you." Jet let out a laugh, a genuine one this time. "You expecting a medal ceremony, or just a thanks for not letting things explode card?" "Either works," Quillon replied with a grin. "But I'll settle for a universe that doesn't fall apart every time we turn our backs." The dreamscape was stabilizing, the energy flowing smoothly as the crew guided it into a new era. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant attention, but they were up to the task. "Quillon," the shimmering entity said, its tone somber yet hopeful, "your influence here has set the stage for a new beginning." He nodded, understanding the weight of what they'd accomplished. "It's a second chance. For the dreamscape, for everyone." The crew, standing together in the heart of the dreamscape, felt the magnitude of their victory. It wasn't just a triumph over the overseers, but a new dawn for the galaxy's collective consciousness. And for Quillon, it was the culmination of all his reckless gambles, his audacious plays. They'd bought the dreamscape time, and in doing so, had given it room to grow into something extraordinary. "Here's to the dreamers," Quillon said, raising an imaginary glass, "and to the dreamscape. May it always be just a bit out of control, just wild enough to keep us on our toes." Jet, Zelenka, Dax, and the diplomat joined in the toast, their voices mingling with the dreamscape's own murmurings. It was a moment of unity, a shared triumph in the face of overwhelming odds. As the shimmering entity pulsed with approval, Quillon couldn't help but smile. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide, and lived to tell the tale. Together, they'd forged a new beginning, one filled with possibility and hope. And as the dreamscape shimmered around them, reflecting the endless possibilities of their shared journey, Quillon knew they'd face whatever came next with the same irreverent determination that had brought them this far. In the vast, uncharted dreamscape of possibility, anything was possible. And for Quillon and his crew, that was the best kind of adventure.